The roar of the F-110 engine filled the cramped cockpit of the F-16C Fighting Falcon as Captain Mike Vegas Roberts settled into his seat under the dull red glow of the pre-dawn sky. It was January 19th, 1991, Day 3 of Operation Desert Storm. The war, still in its early stages, had already turned Baghdad into a fortress ringed by one of the densest concentrations of air defense systems the world had ever seen. Saddam Hussein's military had transformed the Iraqi capital into a lethal cauldron of radar-guided surface-to-air missiles, SAMs, anti-aircraft artillery, APA, and patrolling MiG interceptors. It was a city that bristled with sensors, guns, and missiles, every inch prepared to lash out at anything that dared enter its airspace. Vegas belonged to the U.S. Air Force's elite cadre of wild Weasel pilots, specialists in the dangerous art of suppression of enemy air defenses, SEAD. Their role was as harrowing as it was vital, to bait enemy air defenses into revealing their positions by locking onto their aircraft, then fire back with deadly precision using AGM-88H ARM missiles. These were men who flew straight into the kill zones others avoided, who dared the enemy to shoot first, just so they could shoot back. As the sun began to bleed into the sky, the formation of 4 F-16s roared down the runway at an undisclosed airbase in Saudi Arabia. Vegas led the formation, his HUD flickering with green data streams, his hands steady on the throttle and stick. Around him, the desert still slept, unaware of the violence about to be unleashed above the Euphrates Valley. They climbed swiftly to cruising altitude, their external fuel tanks slung under the wings, each jet armed with a mix of harms, sidewinders, and internal cannon rounds. AWACS aircraft circled far to the rear, feeding them updated enemy radar signatures. Tanker planes hovered in the background sky, silent sentinels ensuring no jet ran dry. And in the distance, just beyond the horizon, other waves of coalition aircraft were lining up. Bombers, electronic warfare birds, and fighters, all relying on the Weasels to clear the path. The approach to Baghdad was nerve-wracking. The Iraqi radar net was vast, and it came alive with sudden intensity. Vegas's threat warning receiver began to chirp, first slowly, then with a rapid staccato as enemy radar locks began painting his aircraft. They were in the zone now. Flying low and fast, Vegas began to weave slightly, minimizing his aircraft's radar cross-section, scanning the terrain for the telltale signs of a SAM launch. The curling white snake of a missile rising from the ground, the faint smoke trails that spelled death. Weasel 1, Spike SA-2 North Sector, bearing 085, came the voice of his wingman, a tense edge in the calm comms. Vegas spotted it too. A radar site had locked onto them. He keyed his targeting pod, designated the signal, and loosed a harm missile. The sleek weapon screamed off the rail and disappeared into the distance. Seconds later, a dull flash lit the sky near the ground. The radar was blind, but the enemy wasn't done. Seconds later, AI opened up, a wall of fire and tracers climbing toward them. Vegas jinked hard left, rolling his F-16 and diving for cover behind a low hill. Explosions blossomed around him, black puffs and orange bursts as flak tried to find him in the morning haze. From the left, another Weasel aircraft released a second harm, taking out a second radar site that had dared to activate. Still more radar locks blinked onto Vegas's threat receiver. The Iraqis were throwing everything they had at them. MiGs scrambled from nearby air bases, visible as small, fast-moving blips on the radar. Weasel 1, MiGs airborne, Vector 090, Angels 15. But the strike package was close now. Vegas's job was nearly done. He looped around, making one more pass, scanning for any remaining SAM launches. Another sight lit him up. Without hesitation, he launched his second harm and then broke hard to starboard, afterburner lit, heading for the extraction corridor. Behind him, the sky lit up as the strike force surged forward, B-52s, F-15Es, and Tornado GR-1s roaring toward their targets. Thanks to the wild Weasels, the first wave would go in cleaner and safer. The defenders were reeling, their sensors blinded, their launchers destroyed or forced offline. As Vegas exited the danger zone, his HUD displaying empty airspace behind him, he allowed himself a moment to exhale. His aircraft was intact, his squadron was alive, and their mission was a success. But he knew tomorrow they'd do it all over again, because the fire over Baghdad hadn't gone out. It was just getting started. At 32 years old, Captain Mike Vegas Roberts was no stranger to combat aviation. A veteran of multiple training deployments and live exercises, he had amassed over 2,000 flight hours in the cockpit of the F-16C Fighting Falcon. He wasn't flashy like the Hollywood pilots portrayed on screen. He didn't strut or boast, and you'd never catch him wearing aviator sunglasses off the flight line. But those who flew with him knew he had the steel nerves and tactical mind of a top-tier aviator. He wasn't in it for glory. He was in it for the guy flying behind him, the guy depending on him to clear the skies of threats and make it back alive. On January 19th, 1991, Day 3 of Operation Desert Storm, that commitment was about to be tested in one of the most dangerous missions imaginable. Baghdad, once a glittering cultural capital of the Arab world, had been transformed into a fortress. It was ringed by concentric layers of Soviet-designed, radar-guided surface-to-air missile, SAM systems, from the lumbering but lethal SA-2 guideline to the quick-reacting SA-6 gainful. Mobile systems like the Roland and OSA AKM lurked in the shadows, their radars often shut down to avoid detection until the last moment, until they fired. AAA emplacements, ZSU-23, 4 Shilka self-propelled guns, and belt-fed 14.5mm machine guns lined rooftops, intersections, and overpasses. And above it all, Saddam Hussein's MiG-29 and MiG-25 interceptors were still occasionally taking off, though most were avoiding direct confrontations with coalition fighters. Vegas sat strapped into his cockpit under the muted red lights of the pre-dawn airbase just before takeoff. His visor was down, HUD head-up display glowing green, showing flight diagnostics, radar cues, and navigation points. In his ear, the voice of the AWACS controller echoed calmly, a robotic contrast to the thunder of his own adrenaline. The F-110 engine behind him gave a low, growling hum, ready to explode into full afterburner at a moment's notice. His jet was fully loaded for the mission, AGM-88 HARM, high-speed anti-radiation missiles, hung from hardpoints under each wing, ready to home in on any radar that dared to blink at him. ALQ-131 electronic countermeasure pods were affixed beneath the fuselage, a last-ditch hope against incoming missiles. This was a SED run, suppression of enemy air defenses, one of the most hazardous assignments in modern warfare. Codenamed Wild Weasel, it was a mission born from Vietnam, designed around a cruel tactical necessity. Bait the enemy into targeting you with radar so you could strike back before they shot you down. The strategy hadn't changed, only the players had. Now, Vegas and his 3 wingmen were the bait, heading straight into the lion's den. The mission briefing had been cold and precise. Satellite imagery and signal intercepts had confirmed at least 5 SA-2 and SA-6 sites active in the immediate area surrounding the ingress point. Worse, intelligence drones had picked up signs that the Iraqis had deployed mobile Roland and OSA units, nimble, deadly threats, particularly below 15,000 feet. The kind of altitude said pilots had to fly in to engage radar systems and clear a path for the high-value strike packages following behind them. Vegas remembered staring at the wall-mounted screen in the dimly lit briefing room as the red lines and target indicators lit up the Baghdad grid. He remembered the silent nods exchanged among the pilots, as the mission commander pointed out their route, straight through the throat of hell. Every man in the room knew the unspoken truth. There would be no combat search and rescue if they were shot down. Not here. Not over Baghdad. Coalition aircraft had air superiority, but Baghdad was different. It was a fortress where even stealth couldn't guarantee safety. If you punched out, you were likely captured or worse. That knowledge sat in the pit of their stomachs like a brick of lead, but it didn't stop them. Not one flyer hesitated. Back in the cockpit as the formation taxied to the runway, Vegas took a moment to absorb the silence before the storm. The early light was just beginning to touch the horizon, casting a muted glow across the tarmac. Behind him, his wingman, Lieutenant Jeff Omaha Ellison, gave a thumbs up. In another jet, Tex and Nails were already running final checks. It was a tight team. They'd trained together, flown together, joked and argued in the mess hall, and now they were going into battle together. AWACS called the airspace clear. Vegas pushed the throttle forward. The F-16 surged ahead like a coiled beast released. As he rotated off the runway and pulled up into the early morning sky, he felt the familiar pressure against his chest, the G-forces reminding him that this was real. They climbed in formation, each aircraft locked into a precise tactical spread, each pilot scanning the sky, radar, and their gut for anything out of place. 20 minutes in, they crossed the border into Iraqi airspace. The desert below stretched out in cold, harsh tones, flat, featureless, deceptive in its simplicity. Radar warnings began to ping faintly in his headset, the first signs of enemy systems tracking them. Vegas's hand hovered near the harm activation switch. Suddenly, the RWR, radar warning receiver, lit up, SA-6 lock. His instincts kicked in. He shouted a call sign to his flight and broke left, dumping flares and chaff as the telltale contrail of a missile streaked upward from the earth. The dance had begun. He fired a harm missile toward the launch point, the AGM-88 screaming toward its radar-emitting prey. Seconds later, the landscape below erupted in a flash of orange and black as the enemy battery was struck, but there was no time to admire it. Another tone, another lock, another missile, and then 8AA began to fill the air like angry bees, tracers arcing upward, clawing at the sky. This was the gauntlet they had to run, and Vegas, calm and steady, kept pushing forward, knowing that the strike package behind him, dozens of jets carrying bombs meant to break the back of Saddam's war machine, was counting on him to survive just long enough to make a difference. The engines began to scream, not in pain but in raw, unbridled power, as the 4 F-16C Fighting Falcons lined up in succession at the far end of the runway at King Khalid Air Base. It was 0400 hours, still deep night in the Saudi desert, where the air was dry and cool, and the sky overhead held a ceiling of stars faintly obscured by the dust of distant winds. The soft, rhythmic thump of ground crews clearing from the tarmac was drowned out by the rising whine of the General Electric F-110 engines spooling up for launch. In the lead jet, Captain Mike Vegas Roberts sat stone-faced, eyes forward, hands poised on the throttle and control stick, his helmet HUD flickering green data points across the visor. The cockpit canopy vibrated as the power surged. Vegas took a slow breath. Around him, the lights on the runway danced in rows, muted and controlled, like a secret path into the void. It was a moment of eerie calm before a descent into chaos. Behind him, Omaha, Tex, and Nails waited for his move. Each jet was fully loaded. Harms underwing, sidewinders on the rails, fuel tanks glinting under faint lighting. They were configured for SEAD, built for war, lean and hungry machines designed to pierce enemy defenses and take down threats before they could strike. Tonight's target wasn't a single radar. It was a nest of Vipers, an interlocked kill zone around Baghdad that would demand nerves of steel and precision of gods. Then came the signal. Vegas shoved the throttle forward into afterburner, and the engine exploded into life with a roar like a thunderclap. Twin tongues of white-hot flame erupted from the nozzle, illuminating the dark behind him in a cone of searing blue and orange. The jet surged forward, wheels screaming against the concrete, nose lifting with practiced grace. Within seconds, the Falcon was airborne, gear retracted, punching through the low desert air like a missile launched by fate itself. One by one, the rest followed. Omaha's bird screamed off the ground in close pursuit, his own afterburners splitting the silence. Tex followed next, wings shimmering with ordnance. Nails brought up the rear, his Falcon trailing vapor as he lifted off, all four aircraft now rising in loose formation into the dark sky above the Arabian Peninsula. From the tower, their taillights formed a constellation streaking eastward, vanishing into the ink-black heavens. They were invisible now to anyone on the ground, just another flicker against the stars. But to those in the air, the reality was stark, visceral, and undeniable. They were inbound. Every man in those cockpits knew what that meant. They were entering the kill zone. In a few short minutes, they'd cross the border into Iraqi airspace, where a wall of radar-guided missiles, anti-aircraft artillery, and infrared-seeking death awaited them. The Iraqis were no slouches. Their defenses, stacked with Soviet-era hardware and freshly hardened by years of war, had already claimed several aircraft in recent days. Even stealth jets weren't immune. But F-16s, the Weasels, they didn't sneak in. They didn't hide. They walked through the front door, middle finger in the air, daring the enemy to come at them. Tonight was no different. The AWACS orbiting high above offered distant coordination, relaying radar pings and potential threats. But in the cockpit, Vegas trusted his own sensors more. His RWR, his instincts, the dance of dots and blips on his scope. Down below, the Iraqi radar systems were waking up. Somewhere ahead, an SA-2 crew was likely watching their screens blink to life. Somewhere, a Roland was tucking into the tree line, waiting to switch on only when its prey got close enough to guarantee a hit. This was the game they played, hunter and hunted in a war of seconds. At 25,000 feet, the flight leveled, holding a tight V formation as they cruised toward the IP initial point, where their attack run would begin. Vegas reached down and flipped on the weapons master arm switch. A soft clunk echoed through the fuselage as his AGM-88s came online, their seekers hungry for radar waves. In the cockpit, the radio crackled. Vegas 1, Omaha, visual, stack clean. Copy, Vegas replied. Stand by for check. The tone was cool, clipped, all business. But under it ran an electric tension, a thread of something primal. Adrenaline surged now, hormones on high alert, as every nerve in his body began to tingle with anticipation. He glanced at the photo taped to his control panel, a snapshot of his wife and young daughter back in Colorado. It was old, slightly faded, but he carried it everywhere. He didn't kiss it, didn't whisper a prayer. He just looked. 1 second, maybe 2. Then back to the fight, because there was no room for sentimentality where they were going. Below, the desert floor had disappeared into the darkness, replaced by clouds, thin veils of moisture glinting silver under moonlight. In moments, they'd be descending into the lower altitudes, entering the danger zone. It was there, amid the overlapping SAM kill boxes and AAA death spirals, that they'd earn their paycheck. They were inbound. The mission had begun. And Vegas, his jaw set, his breathing measured, his hands steady on the controls, was ready to ride the lightning. The ambush. The horizon began to lighten as Captain Mike Vegas Roberts crossed into Iraqi airspace at 25,000 feet, riding a cushion of jet wash and anticipation. Below him, the desert was a lifeless sea of ochre. In the distance, the jagged skyline of Baghdad shimmered like a mirage. But this was no illusion. Baghdad was very real and very dangerous. Strike lead. This is Vegas 1. Fence check complete, he called over the radio. Copy, Vegas. Good hunting. They were flying in tight formation, each aircraft carrying a mix of AGM-88 HARM missiles designed to home in on enemy radar and cluster bombs for ground targets. Vegas scanned his instruments. The RWR, the radar warning receiver, was quiet for now. But the silence never lasted long. Inside each cockpit, the tension was visceral. Every man knew that the Iraqis had been watching. They had learned quickly from the first nights of the war. SAM crews were getting smarter, turning their radars on for just a few seconds at a time before shutting down. It was a deadly cat-and-mouse game. As the strike package neared the outer ring of Baghdad's defenses, all hell broke loose. The RWR screamed. Lock on. Multiple sources. Vegas's HUD lit up with threat symbols, a tight knot clenched in his stomach. Vegas flight, SAM launch, break, break, he shouted, yanking the stick hard to the left and punching out countermeasures. Twin plumes of smoke erupted below as SA-2s rose like angry javelins, arcing toward the formation. Vegas snapped into a series of high G barrel rolls, pulling every maneuver he'd ever practiced. Chaff bloomed behind his aircraft, throwing off the SAM's radar lock, momentarily. The first missile screamed past his canopy with a sound like ripping steel. The second detonated behind him, close, too close. The Falcon shuddered as shrapnel tore through the rear fuselage. Warning lights erupted across the console. Hydraulic pressure dropped. He was hit. "I'm hit! Losing control! Rudder's gone!" he called, voice strained. The nose of the F-16 dipped sharply. Smoke was curling into the cockpit. The engine coughed, then stabilized. Somehow he was still flying, but just barely. Below, anti-aircraft artillery, tracer rounds from ZSU-23s, began reaching for him, carving red lines through the sky. Every instinct screamed get out now, but he wasn't ready to die. Not yet. Vegas 1 to AWACS. I'm hit and heading south. Trying to stay in the air. Need options. There was a pause. Then, cold reality. Vegas 1, be advised, you're deep in threat territory. Rescue not possible at this time. Recommend you egress south at best speed. Godspeed. No SAR, no safety net. He was alone over Baghdad, crippled, hunted, and miles from friendly airspace, but Vegas wasn't done fighting yet.